Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 400 library systems across the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the amazing authors that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, I am so happy to be sitting here with New York Times bestselling author, many times over, Christopher Paolini, as he chats with us about the inheritance cycle in general, but mostly about his newest book, Murtagh. Hello, Christopher. How are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Everybody's super excited to get started, but before we do that, let's cover some general housekeeping that keeps everything running smoothly, and then we'll get things rolling. So we have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but of course you can also submit questions during this live event by clicking the questions button that's just below the live stream. Keep in mind there are a lot of you tuning in today, so we will get to as many questions as time allows. And don't worry if you have to leave early for any reason at all registrants will receive a link to the recording in about 24 hours. Now, to formally introduce our guest for today. Christopher Paolini is the author of the international bestsellers Eragon, Eldest, Brisingar, and Inheritance, as well as The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. Murtagh is now available and marks the highly anticipated return to the world of Eragon. His debut science fiction novel, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, came out in September 2020, and its prequel, Fractal Noise, was released in May 2023. He resides in Paradise Valley, Montana. Again, welcome. I'm sorry if I take some extra breaths here and there. I'm getting over a cold and starting to lose my voice, so it's great that I talk for a living. Thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to have you. I'm going to switch our camera angle here. So I want to start off right before we jumped on live. I came across this wonderful video that Penguin Random House put out called Did I Write That?
I did pretty well, but most of the ones that I missed, most of the ones that I didn't recognize that I had actually written were from Inheritance, which doesn't surprise me, given that it's the biggest of the books, so the most to remember. But the writing process was highly stressful and highly condensed and rushed, and it was a difficult process. So I'm not surprised that's the one I had the most issues with.
Mm-hmm. I loved your answer to the Dragons Love Tacos book. No, they don't.
No, they don't. They'll probably like the ground meat that sometimes goes into tacos, but no, dragons don't eat tacos. Come on. And I say this having read Dragons Love Tacos to my kids more times than I care to remember.
Same. I've got a 3-year-old and we read it a lot currently.
Yes.
Okay, so when you started working on Eragon back in 1998, when you were 15, did you ever expect to still be talking about it in 2024?
No, never. I mean, I've talked about this over the years that I never thought anyone outside my family would read the book, and I barely expected even my sister to read the book. So the fact that it is sort of, I mean, look, at this point, I've resigned myself to the fact that when I die, my tombstone will say, "Here lies the author of Eragon." And, you know, I'm very fortunate with that, but it is kind of weird that the thing I'm best known for, and that sort of objective senses is the most successful thing I've ever done, is also the first thing I ever did. Yeah, to be still talking about it 25 years later, a quarter of a century later, strange experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Eragon is the notable title. It's the first book in the inheritance cycle, but the inheritance cycle in general, I think, deserves the same renown, not just Eragon.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, and I hope to write a lot more in that world. Murtagh is the first stone of many stones along the way, the first brick in the wall of some of the news stories I'm planning to tell.
Mm-hmm. So Your origin story behind publication is a very interesting one, with a lot of stress, it sounded like, and a little bit of kismet at play. Can you talk about how your book went from kind of being self-published by your family to ending up in the hands of Random House Children's Books?
Well, it was a combination of hard work and luck. We were doing a lot of self-promotion. I was cold calling schools and libraries and talking them into letting me do presentations. And that worked pretty well because the librarians could take pre-orders for us. And so, if we went to a bookstore by hand selling, I could maybe sell anywhere between 13 to 40 books in a day. 42 was like the best I ever did, but usually it was around 15 or so books, which just didn't cover printing costs and travel and food and all of that. But going into the schools, we were doing about 300 books a day, which was excellent. So people in the book world were starting to take notice because, of course, if you've been to public school, you may remember the Scholastic book fairs, and all of the Scholastic reps in the different schools were seeing me come to the schools and selling these books and hearing the kids talk about it, and it was getting attention. So we would have gotten a publisher. I would have gotten a publisher eventually, but it just so happened that Carl Hyacin, who is also an author, he wrote the young adult book Hoot, as well as many adult books. He comes up to Montana for, I think he's got a vacation home here in the valley, but he was up here fly fishing, and he bought a copy of Eragon for his then 12-year-old son, Ryan. And fortunately for me, Ryan liked the book, and Carl recommended it to Random House, and it sort of bounced around among the editors for a couple of months before my editor-to-be grabbed it and said, yes, I want to take a chance on this teenage author, and we're going to offer him money for a trilogy that only exists in his head and, see what happens. So it was a big risk for Random House, and it was a big risk for me because the book was successful, self-published, and we knew that giving it to a publisher, you lose the rights to a degree, and most books don't turn a profit, and it could have just ended up in the remainder bin. So what really worked in my favor is that Random House, and specifically Random House children's books, and specifically the imprint of Knopf, which is where I'm at, were looking for, they were looking for their own Harry Potter, essentially. Scholastic was publishing Harry Potter, and Scholastic also gave me an offer for Eragon, but I could tell that Random House was the one that really loved the book, and Scholastic was doing it because they thought it was a good business opportunity. Scholastic actually offered more money than Random House, but I went with Random House, and it was the right choice. And I found out after the fact that Chip Gibson, who was the head of the children's department at the time, basically chose to use Eragon as sort of something to rally the troops and put the entire children's division behind it. And I was the very fortunate recipient of that love and attention, which of course would only get you so far if people didn't enjoy reading the book. But fortunately for me, they did a great job marketing it, and then people actually enjoyed the book. So yeah.
You had a lot of,
which is why when people ask me how to get published, I mean, it's like, what am I supposed to say? It's
I know.
The answer ultimately is you write a book that people want to read, and that's a facile answer, but it is true. If people want to read it, it makes everything else easier. The agent wants you, the publishers want you, and ultimately the public wants you.
Mm-hmm. Number one question that we receive for every single event is, how did you find an agent? How did you get published? So I always try to ask it in a way that's relevant.
The agent was, we had the offer from Random House, and like 2 days later, we had the offer from Scholastic. And so we knew we didn't know what we didn't know.
Yeah.
My dad participated in some online like self-publishing forum sort of thing. So he posted up a question and said, look, this is the situation we're in. Does anyone have any advice? And another one of the members said, well, I was just at this publishing writing conference, and there was this young agent there, and I was really impressed with his presentation or him talking about the industry. So my dad got his information online and did what you're never supposed to do, which is he called the agent directly and left this long, rambling voicemail message, because it was lunchtime in New York, and you take your lunch breaks in New York. And only at the end of the message did he say, oh, yes, and by the way, my we have two competing offers from two publishing houses. And when I asked him, I said, why did you do that? He said, well, because if he's any good as an agent, he's going to listen to the whole message before he deletes it. And we found out later that he nearly deleted the message without, because my dad started off like, I got this teenage son and he's written this book and okay.
Everybody thinks their child's great.
Exactly. So it was like 2 hours later, we got a call from Simon, and Simon said, overnight me a copy of Eragon, and if I like it, I'll represent you. And Simon has been my agent for 20 years now, 22 years, 21 years, something like that. So
that's an excellent story. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so talking about the books specifically, we had a lot of questions, and I've seen other interviews where you answer these questions similarly too, about maps and artwork in the books themselves. And Ariel is saying, I was really impressed by the maps at the beginning of your books and how easy it was to follow along with the character's journey through the use of the maps. How did you create the maps? Were they made first or after writing the story?
Ooh, great question. Well, the map for Eragon, the original black and white map, I did about halfway or a third of the way into Eragon. I started Eragon with two cockamamie ideas. One was that if travel took a long time for the characters, I should take a long time describing it so that the reader felt like it took a long time, which meant that there was pages and pages of description of landscape and travel that, of course, my parents and then later my editor at Random House just said, we don't need this. Let's just take this out. That was the right choice. Two, my other idea was, and I still kind of believe this, is that a well-written book shouldn't need a map in order to understand the story. You should be able to keep your bearings just based off the text. What I ran into, though, was that I was getting lost in the world myself with the amount of places and things after a certain point. And so I drew a map, and it was like the western half of the current map. And I thought, well, this gives me everything I need. But then I was like, oh, I want to visit this location. I want to visit that location. And pretty soon I realized I was out of space. So I didn't want to spend like days and days drawing another map because I wanted to keep writing. So I took another sheet of printer paper and put it next to the first one. And I quickly scribbled in some mountains in a giant forest. And I was really late. I mean, I did this in like 15 seconds, 30 seconds tops. And I was moving so fast that I made the mountains like huge. And I looked at that and I was like, well, wait a minute. What if they actually were 10 times bigger than the normal mountains? And that's how I got my Bure Mountains. Also, I'd read an article about the mountains in New Zealand being 10 miles high if it weren't for erosion, given their rate of upheaval. But that also contributed. For Murtagh, though, the book is divided into sections, and each section has either a map or an image associated with that section. And I love providing art for my books. I do all of the interior art for my books, with very few exceptions. And that was a fun opportunity to do that. Although I've gotten a few people who've been annoyed that the map at the beginning of Murtagh, all of the locations are labeled in runes, which I do provide a Rosetta Stone for at the back of the book. Of course, you have to go look in the back of the book and know that it's there in order to figure that out. So some people have been like, how am I supposed to know where Murtagh is? Come on. But the idea was that it is an in-universe artifact. It's actually the map that Murtagh himself is carrying around, which is why it's all wrinkled and stained and, actually is what he's carrying around. So I love doing the interior art as much as I can. And in fact, I just, in January, I think, or February, I can't remember. I'm losing track of this year already. I painted a global map for the world of Eragon. And in full color. It's like a NASA equidistant rectilinear projection map of the entire globe of the world of Eragon. And I just, over the past weekend, did a last round of tweaks on it, and it is now getting developed for release. I can't tell you exactly how, but it's gorgeous. And the problem with drawing a map like that is you do it, and it's like, it gives you so many ideas. I want to go to this location. I want to go to that location, and that's part of why I did do it.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, you must just drawing that map alone have so many stories coming out of that, that it makes me wonder, in, what was it, 12 years that you took a break from the World of Eragon, were you still like kind of working on artwork? And I mean, you had your short story,
Yeah.
but were you still
No,
dabbling?
no. The short answer is no, because writing books takes me longer than I want it to take me. So if usually I'm just working on writing a book, and I don't really allow myself to take time to do much of anything else. So I only do art, usually 9 times out of 10, only do art between books, between manuscripts. So I'll finish Murtagh and then go do the art for Murtagh. And that's my little break before I start writing the next book. So, in those years that I was working on To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, no, I wasn't doing any art. I was doing world building for both the World of Eragon and the Fractalverse. A lot of world building, tying lots of things together and big plans. My brain never stopped working on that. But as far as actual drawings, not really.
Okay. Well, I can't wait to see what comes of the map. It's pretty cool. So, okay, how do you keep all of this straight? Sophia is saying, first of all, thank you for coming back to the World of Eragon and writing Murtagh's story. Absolutely loved it. My question is, how do you keep all the details of your book and world organized?
It's not that complicated. Look, it can be as complicated as you want it to be. The easy answer is create some Word files or whatever, word processor you're working in. Create some files. Create one for people, places, and things. Create one for your languages if you have invented languages, and create one for general lore and history if you need that as well. And then every time you invent some detail, you go to the relevant document and paste in whatever you've just created. You will certainly change things as you write the book or books. That's fine. But just record what you're creating so you know what to track and and you will forget to put stuff in those documents. At least I do. I usually get like 95% of everything, and then there's some names that I'm in the middle of writing and I'm not even thinking, and I don't want to open up another document and stop the flow of the writing, but I usually get most of it. Now the luxurious privileged answer to that is you can do what I did, which is hire an assistant or assistants and give them your documents with all of that information and have them build you a private Wikipedia. That's what you do when you've been doing this for 20 years and have the resources to do this. And it's amazing. When I was writing Murtagh, again, I was coming back to this world after 11 years. And although I spent more than 10 years in that world, and I remember it very well, little details sometimes slip your mind, especially if you're sleep deprived from a baby in the house. So having that sort of a resource in the wiki was fantastic. I could go in and check, okay, how old is this character? What's their eye color? Where are they from? Who's their parent again, and who's their grandparent, whatever. And it's all there.
That's excellent.
The only downside then for my assistants, my long suffering assistants, is that every time I write a new book, they have a metric ton of information that they then have to input into the wiki, either as updates to existing pages or new pages.
Job security.
Hey, I've been very happy with my employees, and they've been with me for a long time. So,
well, Shane from Butte Silverbow Public Library, probably not too far from you. One of my favorite parts of the inheritance cycle was the forging of Brisingar. Could you please tell us about the research process you used in order to construct such an intricate and detailed scene?
Well, I've done a fair bit of metalworking myself. I built 2 forges as a kid. I think I credited in the back of Brisingar 2 different books I have on Japanese sword making, both of which I referenced pretty heavily because they were relevant, since Brisingar is made from meteorite steel, and there's various reasons for using the Japanese method on a Western style sword in that book. So I did some research, but I also had a fair bit of practical knowledge, and that was helpful. That scene actually was even longer because if you know your metalworking, you'll know there's definitely some things I skimmed over or condensed, and it was just because the scene was too long, and my editor said, "Look, Christopher, just summarize or say it was magic. It's you've got a magic elven smith. Let her use some magic. Move it along a little faster." So I was aware of the things that I had to skimp over a little bit, but no, that was one of my favorite scenes to write, and I think that came through since so many people enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. Delaney is asking, I loved being able to translate different languages as I read through the books. What was the inspiration for the languages, and how did you go about developing them further beyond the inspiration?
Well, I always have to qualify this by saying I am not a linguist, and it shows. I love language, and I've learned a lot more over the years, but I'm not a linguist, and I don't. I haven't pursued that to the degree that maybe I should. Tolkien was a linguist, and again, it shows. But that said, I still love playing around with it, and it, I think, adds to the world. So the original inspiration for the ancient language was Old Norse, which I think gives it a nice sound and feel. The other languages were invented from scratch. My favorite one's probably the Dwarvish language, since you can really sink your teeth into it. But what I would do these days, or what I did with other languages, is come up with a couple of words that sort of had a general feel that I liked, and then extrapolating from those invented words, figuring out what consonants and vowels and clusters thereof that I wanted, come up with some more sample words based off that, and then start working out some grammar. So grammar is probably my weakest spot, since at the time I wasn't really aware of non-English grammar systems, and that's, I've put some more attention in that since then.
Mm-hmm. So does your wiki have a language dictionary?
Yes.
Awesome.
Of course.
Do your assistants speak the languages?
No.
Since they have to input all of it.
No. Although maybe they'll learn how to curse in the languages as a result.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, of course, you have a book about dragons. We've got some dragon questions. So Joan from Edith Wheeler Memorial Library says, what discoveries about dragons do you continue to uncover, and how do you continue to draw inspiration for describing the dragons in very different ways?
That's a difficult question to answer. If I were writing a story that wasn't in the World of Eragon, something completely new, then I think, I draw a little bit more from some stuff I've read in mythology and just other fantasy books over the years. Specifically in this series, though, what I'm discovering, if anything, is just further exploration of what I've already established. So taking it to the logical extremes of, okay, if the dragons exhibit these traits, what about this? What about that? How would that actually influence things? And also in my world, I have a couple of dragon-adjacent species, because it seemed to me that if the dragons existed, well, as with most creatures, there'd be something similar as well, that had evolved along similar lines, but wasn't actually a dragon. So I have a couple of those, and those are fun to play with as well.
Mm-hmm. Brett from Provincetown Public Library is saying, what does the archetype of dragon mean to you? How does that play out in the storyline? And when have the greatest flows of creativity and newness within the world happened for you? I think that, the last question is a little bit separate from the first two.
Yeah. Dragons to me represent, they're a creative and destructive force, as they always are in mythology. And when a dragon shows up, you just know things are about to get serious. It's like, you got a romance novel in New York City, and all of a sudden a dragon shows up. Okay, the stakes just got elevated. And part of that is because mythologically, dragons are always linked to the creation or destruction or even the health of the land. And that's something that a lot of other mythological creatures don't have. Plus, they're big, or they can be big. Sometimes they speak. Sometimes they have magical powers. They can breathe fire or other noxious things. They can fly, assuming it has wings. And of course, if you go with the Eastern tradition, then, they can bring good luck, and there's all sorts of other cool things you can do with them. So dragons are just interesting, and add a lot to a story, I think. As far as when have I felt my greatest creative flow and inspiration, it's just whenever I know what I'm trying to write in terms of the scene. I understand what it's doing for the characters and who the characters are, and it all clicks together. And I don't have to sit there banging my head against the keyboard trying to figure any of that out. And then I can just work on writing it.
Mm-hmm. Aren't there times where you have to bang your head against the keyboard? Or do you just get up and walk outside and just walk away from it?
Well, you need to do some of the head banging on occasion just to get past the tough stuff. But you also have to recognize when you're not making any progress, and then it's better to step away, move physically in order to get your brain to move. And that learning when to step away is always a challenge and has taken me a long time.
So I like Connor's question. Does the spell, or no, sorry, that's the wrong question, Connor. I'll ask that one later. Jordan's question says, Zorak looks awesome behind you on the wall. Do you have any other in real life creations of the other weapons, armor, items, and or other stuff from the books?
Alas, no. Well, I have a replica of Zorak over there from the film that doesn't exist. And there was a replica of Brissinger that was made by the show Man at Arms. There's that episode is up on YouTube if you want to check it out. It's pretty cool. And I've been trying to get that sword or a replica of that sword from the smith for a couple of years, and it's just like pulling teeth. So I'm not quite sure what's happening on that front.
Wow, but, that's surprising. I feel like you would be the first person that would get one if you asked.
Yeah, and not quite sure what's going on that front, but this one was funded by the fans, and so it's really my favorite one as a result.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's dive into some questions about Murtagh. I do have to say that about 50% of the people who tune in to some of these talks haven't read the books yet. So I don't ask a lot of spoiler questions. So if you are going to spoil, if you're going to give a spoiler, then just give a little warning, and that's, or I'll try to catch it and give a warning. Okay, so Murtagh, Eragon's half-brother, gets his own book, takes center stage as he attempts to basically survive alongside his dragon Thorn while they're in exile. It's a standalone novel, but also kind of a sequel to the inheritance cycle, even though in the acknowledgments of the book, you say that it's most definitely not book 5. Is that right?
Right.
Got all that right. Okay. So what I loved, because I've read all of the inheritance cycle, but it has been probably 10 years or so. So jumping into Murtagh was such a wonderful treat, and revisiting a lot of names that have been nested in my brain for quite a while now. It was wonderful. Sarah from Thousand Oaks Library says, what was your biggest inspiration to return to this universe and write Murtagh? Was it always in the works? But in a little bit of my research, there's a story of a tweet. Is that right?
Yeah. So, boy, it's a little convoluted. Ultimately, you can blame the existence of Murtagh on, well, a couple of things. So starting in 2017 or so, I was feeling a little frustrated in my life for various reasons. And so I decided that I was going to say yes to every appearance opportunity that came my way, just as a way of getting myself out of the house, living life, traveling, seeing stuff, meeting people, etc. So I said yes to going to a bunch of conventions, and then sort of out of nowhere, Barnes & Noble asked if I would be their author in residence for 2018. Was it 2018 or 2019? 2019. So they asked in 2018. And so I said yes. And what that meant was I was going to be traveling to a different B&N bookstore every month for the entire year of 2019. Wow. And yeah. Now, if shortly after I said yes, my mom actually came to me and she said, Christopher, you're going to be doing that. That's going to be a lot of work. Sure would be nice if you had something new published for 2019. And at this time, I was deep into revisions on To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which was a massive, massive book. But I thought that, hey, that's a great idea. So I took like a month or two, and I wrote and revised what became The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, Tales from Alagaësia, short stories set in the world of Eragon. The first story in there, the Fork story, was based off a tweet that a fan sent me. And again, I think it was 2016 or 2017. And they said, hey, Christopher, can you tell us anything about what Murtagh and Thorn are doing after the end of the inheritance cycle? And it was way too late for me, past my bedtime. And I said something like, Murtagh just enchanted a fork to be more deadly than any sword and won a fight with it. And Thorn isn't very happy with him. And I couldn't stop thinking about that. So that became the basis for the Fork story. And then once I wrote it, I couldn't stop thinking about sort of where that story would lead for Murtagh and the world of Alagaësia. I finished To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. And then I was like, okay, it's time to write a dragon book now. Well, I finished To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and I finished revising Fractal Noise. I actually delivered Fractal Noise to Tor all the way back in 2021, I want to say.
It came out in 2023.
Yeah, I delivered it in 2021, and I didn't get editing until, anyway, long story. But I delivered it end of 2021, or fairly in 2021. And then I was like, okay, it's time for dragons. And I was looking at writing book 5, the long-awaited book 5. And I was realizing, though, the more I looked at it, because there's a time jump between Inheritance and book 5, I realized that I was having to do too much explaining of all the things that had happened leading up to book 5. It was just going to be deadly dull. So then I went back to those thoughts I'd had of Murtagh and the Fork story, and I was like, well, wait a minute. What if I wrote a book about Murtagh? I've always wanted to. This might be a good reason and good time, and a good opportunity. And aside from like setting the stage for later stories, the real reason to do it for me was that Murtagh is one of the main characters of the inheritance cycle. There's Eragon, there's Arya, there's Roran, there's Nasawada, and there's Murtagh. But we really don't see a whole lot of Murtagh after the first book. He's taken away, he's imprisoned, and we only see him appearing essentially as a villain. And I felt that there was a real missed opportunity there, or there was an opportunity to rectify that and show what actually was going on during that time. And so I took it. And that's ultimately how Murtagh came about. So, books come about through many different ways. Also, on a very practical side of things, last year was the 20th anniversary of the release of Eragon, and so that was also an extra motivation. I was going to write Murtagh anyway, but it was like, okay, not just going to write it. Let's make sure that it's done in time so it could come out on the 20th anniversary, which, of course, it did.
Well, and you also released a special edition of Eragon on the same day, right?
Yes, an illustrated edition. It's like a big coffee table size book. It has 50. It's full color throughout. It has over 50 illustrations, paintings, and drawings. And we are currently working on the illustrated edition for Eldest now, which should come out next year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great things. So David wants to know, what was the hardest challenge in writing from the perspective of Murtagh after writing from the perspective of Eragon for so long?
Well, just that. Figuring out how his voice differed from Eragon's, and how Thorn differed from Saphira, and their relationship differed from Eragon and Saphira's. And then also, I went back and looked at Murtagh's dialogue from Eragon, and boy, was he pretentious. Or let me rephrase that. Boy, was I pretentious back then. And I didn't want to write him exactly the way I'd written him in the first book, but he's...
Uh-oh, looks like we're frozen. Oh, okay. You were frozen. Was I? I think you're back. Okay. All right. The last thing I heard was you didn't want to write him exactly how he was written in the first book.
Yeah, and balancing that, and also figuring out his relationship with Thorn, that was the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also there's probably something to be said for the fact that you are older now, you're a father now, so how you experience Murtagh as a character is maybe different for you as well. Is that a fair characterization?
I think so. I don't think I could have written this book 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Not the way I did.
Mm-hmm. Jeff from Findlay Hancock County Public Library says Murtagh's character evolves from antagonist to a kind of complex anti-hero in the new book. What were your motivations behind this evolution? I guess
Well,
just
he's not.
fair
I mean,
shake.
he's not a villain in the sense that he didn't choose evil for the most part, although he's made some questionable choices at times. So that was interesting to
Mhm.
evolve, and I didn't want to push him further down the road of villainy, so to speak, because that just feels, I don't know, obvious and lazy to me. So I wanted to give him and Thorn a chance to find a path to redemption.
Well, there's also something to be said about the person who has to do everything because they're being um, brainwashed. I mean,
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. I mean, a lot of it he was forced to do, so he still did it, and he had some choices along the way. But for the most part, he was coerced, and that has to be taken into account.
absolutely. We did get a couple of questions about kind of overcoming trauma and the cult experience. So Dylan from Wallingford Public Library is saying, my question is related to Murtagh and overcoming trauma. The character had been through so much during the first 4 books, and throughout Murtagh, both he and Thorn are constantly confronted with reminders of their past. Yet each time Murtagh is confronted with these reminders and challenges, his responses to them feel very true to his character. In short, how did you stay true to the decisions that Murtagh would make when confronted with these things? And in what ways, if any, did that inform the arc you wanted him to follow throughout the book?
Well, I appreciate that you felt that those choices were true to who Murtagh is. I think when writing a character, at least for me, I create a mental framework for who the person is and how they would react, and then the story, especially if they're the main character, is tailored around that. Um,
Mhm.
I tailored the encounters and the choices and what happened specifically to who Murtagh and Thorn are and what their issues are, and that is the story. At least
Right.
the way I built the story. There is no other story. If I weren't addressing their issues, this story wouldn't even happen. So.
Mhm. And as far as the cult experience, somebody who wishes to remain anonymous says the cult experience in the pages of Murtagh eerily echoed in some ways certain experiences I've had with religion. Could you talk about where that part of your writing came from or how you went about writing it?
Well, without I understand why that comment's anonymous, and I'm going to kind of adhere to that philosophy of anonymity here. Without going into details, I've had some family members who were in a cult at one point, and that occasioned quite a bit of discussion in my life growing up. So,
Mhm.
although the cult might seem, it probably is completely over the top and cartoony in some ways, you would be astounded by how much of that was essentially true to life.
Mhm.
So let's put it this way. Playing Far Cry 5, if anyone's familiar with that, was a distinctly uncomfortable experience for me.
I've watched my husband play that game. so
So,
I,
so I did whatever I do when I encounter something uncomfortable. I played the game like 4 times in a row.
oh my God. Immersion therapy.
But by the way, story aside, visually, that game looks exactly like Montana. The only uh, sort of thing they didn't quite get is our mountains actually look a little better where I live. So, but
Okay.
if you want to know what it looks like in Montana, that game nailed it.
Um, Taylor from Ascension Parish Library says, what was your favorite scene or moment that you wrote for Murtagh?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'd say the last chapter,
Okay.
And I'm not going to say why, but I think it's obvious. There's a scene with a creature named Murtagh, which I quite enjoy. Not just the confrontation with Murtagh, the aftermath in the water. That was really. I was reading Blood Meridian at the time, and I think that influenced my descriptions. And there is a point in the story where something is renamed, and that was a very meaningful scene for me.
Okay. See, I understand that like the no spoilers is hard, but I kind of feel like it's now a bit of an Easter egg when you're reading through and you're like, that's what he was talking about.
Yes. Also, there's a weircat in the book, and I love writing I love weircats. They're so much fun to write.
Yeah. Okay. Chris says there were a lot of hints at much more to come in Murtagh. When you set out to write his story, did you also have the big picture already figured out, or did those elements happen organically?
Absolutely. No, I knew that was always one of the main goals, was putting pieces in place for what's to come. My only difficulty is that I have placed so many pieces for both the World of Eragon and the Fractal Verse, which is my science fiction setting, that I now need to start delivering. And I need to start delivering fast so that people actually know what I'm doing, because I have placed so many pieces. It's probably going to take me the rest of my life to pay off what I'm doing, but all the pieces are now in place. Now we start getting payoffs.
Well, we can't wait for those payoffs. I remember waiting for, like, after Eragon, waiting for every book after Eldest, Brisengard, Inheritance. It was like, you and I are the same age too, so I kind of felt like I grew up with your work, so to speak, at the same time as you, even though I didn't write it. That's pretty, yeah.
Hey, at least you don't have any white in your beard.
I waxed it just for this.
Oh God, I remember watching a guy on YouTube. I think it was LA Beast, who actually waxed his beard off, and it looked like the most painful thing in the world, aside from the video where he ate a cactus. But you know.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, random tangents.
Okay, so Tristan from Stowe Monroe Falls Public Library says, if more books are planned, do you feel Murtagh may bring the inheritance cycle closer to adult fiction, similar to Sleep in a Sea of Stars, given some of the darker themes like abuse and torture that were seen in the book?
The inheritance cycle will never be adult in that sense. I mean, Murtagh is essentially adult fantasy and could be shelved as such. So was Inheritance for that. I mean, there's a few things I am a little more delicate about in the inheritance cycle than I am in my science fiction. But at the same time, I have no desire to go full Game of Thrones. That's not the type of fiction I'm writing. That's not the type of world or story that it's in, even though it does deal with some intense stuff at times. So I actually think that the next story I write in the World of Eragon may actually take a step back and be a little bit more like the age range of Eragon. But there are other stories in the World of Eragon that are similar in maturity to what Murtagh was.
Okay.
It just depends on the specific story. Like if I go write a story about Essie, the young girl who appears in the Fork story, that would be aimed younger than something like another book about Murtagh.
Sure. So then,
but part of it is, as you said, so many of my readers have grown up with the series, just like I have, and so with Murtagh, I kind of felt like, you know, if you've been with me since the beginning, I want to write a book that you can enjoy as a 35, 40-year-old person versus someone who's 16. And if you're 16, you can still enjoy it.
Exactly. So is it going to be a new series, or is each book going to be kind of a standalone? Caroline from Greene County Public Library is saying, I'm a huge fan of Dragons and your books, but are any other characters going to get standalone novels?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and no comment. There's a big announcement that'll happen at some point, but I'm not ready to make it quite yet.
Okay. All right. Another anonymous question. Actually, I love this question, and you'll have to correct me on the name because I'm probably going to say it wrong. But they say, I loved Murtagh. In fact, I'm listening to Malt Wegman. Did I say that correctly?
Malta Wegman.
Malta Wegman's work for the audio book music right now, and it's really amazing. It both confirms and expands my understanding of the Murtagh book. I don't know how much of a hand you had in how the pieces turned out in the end, but if you did, can you share what the collaboration process was like? And so, I agree. I love the music.
Malta is a fan, and he started releasing Inheritance-inspired music, well, even before To Sleep in a Sea of Stars came out. I saw it, I enjoyed it, and I saw him developing as a composer as he was going along. With To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, we really worked on making that a beautiful package, both in the print version and the audiobook. So I reached out to Malta and asked if he'd be interested in doing some music for the audiobook, which he did. And he's now done music for every book since then. So To Sleep, Fractal Noise, and now Murtagh, which, by the way, the Fractal Noise audiobook is fantastic. There's sound effects through the whole thing. There's music. It's really quite the production. With Murtagh, Random House does not normally use music in their audiobooks, and they haven't really done it with the Inheritance cycle. I think they might have used a little outro music in the past, but that's about it. So I told him, I want to do this. And Malta came up with some initial sketches for pieces for each of the different sections in the book. And then I gave him my feedback. Some of them, he nailed them right off the bat. Others, he was in the general ballpark. And then I wanted to work with him to get it right where I wanted it for the world. I think one or two pieces we had to go around with quite a few times. Like the main theme for Murtagh himself, I wanted something that felt both noble and yet aching at the same time, and also masculine, which felt important. I don't know, just kind of getting the right tone, the right feel. That it was tricky, and Malta did it. He really did it. So I got to hand it to him. It's great feeling throughout, and assuming he's available and interested, I look forward to continuing to have his music in my audiobooks.
Yeah, the music really is beautiful. I was listening to it today, and I listened to it a couple days ago while reading. It's very, I don't know.
It's evocative, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Good word. I'm glad somebody here's a writer. No. Okay, so we have quite a few questions about Angela, but we also have a couple of questions about To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. So I can transition there kind of easily because we do see potentially Angela in kind of this crossover To Sleep in a Sea of Stars.
I don't know what you're talking about. That character has a different name. The cat that she's with has a different name. I don't know what you're talking about.
She likes to be where interesting things are happening.
That's right. That's right. She actually appears in Murtagh. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah.
Did I miss that?
You did.
Okay, well, I guess I have to read it again, which was always going to be
under a different name that she was given by the Urgles.
Oh, okay. Well, now that I get to go back through a second time and read it, I get to read for complete pleasure instead of preparation also. Gotcha. So
it's the completionist read through. All achievements unlocked.
Okay, so Alicia from Washoe County Library says, in your novel, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, you explored space. Do you believe this is the future? Why or why not? What led you down this path?
Well, if it's not the future, we're all dead. It's as simple as that. No, I mean, it's simple as that. We know that the sun is going to expand and make the Earth uninhabitable in about 3 billion years. And shortly after that, will envelop the Earth. So that's it. If we don't get off this planet, then we don't survive. Our descendants won't survive, and there's a good chance that all the life on this planet won't survive either. Now, you could make an argument that if humans go away, another intelligent species could evolve. The counter to that is that in all the history of this planet, only one self-aware technological species has ever evolved. And the odds of another one happening, hard to calculate, but in the time that's left on Earth, might not happen. And a lot of the easy to get resources are getting gobbled up now. It's very possible that another species that came along wouldn't find easily accessible oil or coal or things like that. And so getting off this planet later on would be difficult. So getting off of Earth is imperative. And especially if we care about all the other life on this planet, we are probably the only hope that life has to survive. So aside from that, I just think it's a crying shame if we don't get out to explore more, given the sheer size of the universe. It's like, I mean, look how big Earth is and everything we've done here. And then you imagine, like, we could go to an entirely another planet. And we've got multiple planets we could go looking at. Maybe we could go to another star system. Even without FTL, it is actually possible to explore and colonize the Milky Way. It would be difficult, but it's not impossible. So yeah, so I'm a big proponent of that. I love fantasizing and dreaming about the future I hope our species will have out beyond Earth, although Earth is special and beautiful, and I hope we protect it as much as possible. So yeah, that was definitely, and I that's one of the reasons I love reading science fiction.
So you wrote To Sleep in a Sea of Stars because you know that that's our final outcome.
No, I wrote it because I had a story I wanted to tell and I felt passionate about. But my other interests played into that as well.
Okay. Wayne wants to know, how did you educate yourself or research to be able to write a book like To Sleep in a Sea of Stars? It was a remarkable book for me, and I was astonished at its complexity and scope.
Oh, thank you. I beat my head against the keyboard for literally a year and a half. I gave myself certain challenges. So first of all, there's a fantastic website called atomicrockets.com, which is run by Winchell Chung, I think. Apologies if I messed up his name, but he created the website specifically to provide a resource for science fiction authors. And I know for a fact that the writers of The Expanse have drawn from it, as have the original writers of the Mass Effect series, and of course myself, and quite a few other authors as well. So it's a fantastic resource. So I read that entire website. I also wanted faster than light travel because I wanted to be able to visit multiple systems in a reasonable amount of time, but I didn't want to use some FTL system that some other franchise had used, whether it was book, film, or television, or video games. And I really wanted to find a way to have an FTL system that didn't allow for time travel. Most FTL systems, like, the warp system from Star Trek or the hyperdrive from Star Wars or many others, would allow for time travel, and they just ignore that. I didn't want to ignore that. So along with all the things I was reading about, like potential developments of AI and biological tech and space combat and all that, I was also looking at the FTL, and that FTL thing really was a problem. I ultimately found a couple of presentations by a guy, Gregory Mahalik, he works on developing like nuclear propulsion for NASA. And he and a couple other guys have this theory called the tri-space theory. It's not quite a theory of everything, but it's heading in that direction. And Greg was kind enough to spend hours and hours with me on the phone talking me through the implications. And I like to think I actually asked a few questions that got him to think of some new aspects of it as well. And that formed the basis for my FTL technology, which also shaped everything from how my ships engage in combat to communications and sensors, and all of that has implications for the spread of civilization and colonization. And so, it was a huge project, and I wouldn't have made that investment of time if I wasn't planning on writing in the Fractalverse for the rest of my life. Now, the Fractalverse doesn't sell anywhere near that the Inheritance Cycle or the World of Eragon does, but I love writing those stories, and I think more and more readers are finding them and enjoying them as well. So I plan on writing in the Fractalverse and the World of Eragon for the rest of my life.
Just add some dragons and it'll...
Space dragons.
Space dragons, yeah. So did Fractal Noise, did it go faster since you had the bulk of the research done in the first one?
Yeah, well, I wrote the first draft of Fractal Noise in 2013, but I wasn't
Oh,
really happy with it, so I shelved it. And then after To Sleep was done, and also I didn't want it to be the introduction to the Fractalverse. So after To Sleep was done, I spent, I want to say like 2.5 months revising it, and then, you know, it was pretty much good to go. Also, it's a much, much shorter book. To Sleep is my longest book. It's like 302,000 words, which, that's not a Brandon Sanderson length book, but that is a big book. And Fractal Noise is my shortest full length novel at about 80 some thousand words if you count the back material.
that is pretty small for you.
Yeah. And
1,000
Murtagh is
words.
sort of in between. It's about
Yeah.
198,000 words long. So that's how we keep track of book length in publishing, because you can change the font size, you can change the spacing, but you can't change the word count without actually writing or deleting the words.
Mm-hmm.
So for comparison, I think The Hobbit is about 75,000 words long. Some of Brandon's books are over 400,000 words long. So yeah,
That's like a 35-hour audiobook.
pretty much.
Yeah.
I remember Patrick Rothfuss told me that Wise Man's Fear was only 40,000 words shorter than the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy combined.
Oh, wow.
Assuming I'm remembering that correctly. So
Wow.
yeah, that's a big book.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. I want to ask Rebecca's question. Which of your characters would you bring along with you to a deserted island?
Saphira, because she could fly me off the deserted island.
That's a smart answer. Okay. So one of the questions that I typically like to close with is, and I realize the list might be long, is what are you reading? Well, or it might be very short because you might be writing. So what are you reading now? And what that you think everybody should run out to the library and check out immediately? And if you're not reading anything now, then what should everybody?
My reading has been sorely, sorely deficient in the past few years between books and kids. The last book I read in full was Fourth Wing, because I did an event with Rebecca Yarrow. I'm currently reading a book called Treason. It's a treason or traitor. It's a fantasy book, all about trade wars, essentially. Maybe it's traitor. I have to look that up. I'm really enjoying it so far, but that's all I'm reading at the moment. As far as a book that everyone should go out and read, I mean, if you haven't read Dune, you better go read Dune. Murtagh would be a good option if you want to go read a book. But boy, I'm trying to think of a really good book I'd recommend at the moment. I'm not sure. All the classics, all the classics in sci-fi fantasy, you're not going to go wrong. Or if you do, it'll at least give you something interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, your inspirations, I think I read, were like Tolkien.
Anne McCaffrey, Ursula K. Le Guin with the Wizard of Earthsea series, the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake, The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison, David Eddings, Raymond Feist, Tad Williams with Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and many, many others. The Redwall series.
Mm-hmm. Well, look at all those recommendations we just got.
Yes, and there's a lot of awesome authors working these days as well. I'm definitely out of touch with current books because I'm not 14 years old and reading 7 books a week these days. But I would like to write some more. I'll answer a few questions here real fast because I saw them here on the side.
Okay.
How do I make time to write books with kids? I have a lot of help. My wife is very kind and watches takes care of the kids during the day, but it is a challenge. Someone says, what is a video game you enjoyed playing the most? Riven, which is the second game in the Myst series from the 90s. Absolutely love that. Also Minecraft, amazing. Unreal Tournament 99. Control is fantastic. And someone says, please ask about live action possibilities. Well, the Eragon TV show is under development at Disney Plus, and I'm hopeful we're going to have some news on that front before too long here. I think things are moving along there.
Yeah.
And I'm actually revising episode 2 of episode 2 of the television show for To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which is also in development. So hopefully there's going to be some news on both of those before too long.
Amazing. I hadn't heard about To Sleep in a Sea of Stars development.
Yeah, it's been slow for a couple of reasons, but it's now, the slowness has shifted and now it's moving along pretty fast.
Well, those are a lot of exciting things to leave us with. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly been so much fun talking to you for the last hour. I appreciate you being here. With that, I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, below the live stream video in the Rate This Program tab, you can find a link to the resources area, which contains a link to Christopher's website and instructions on how to get your hands on Murtagh. We look forward to seeing you all again on March 21st when we chat with New York Times bestselling author Madeline Miller, and again on April 2nd when we host Smithsonian curator Paula J. Johnson as she explores a sweeping history of food and culture. I am Brandon Adler. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.